The grandfather who kept his granddaughter and great-granddaughter as wives. This is not sensationalism, but the reality uncovered in the isolated Appalachian Mountains in 1967. After concerned neighbors reported unsettling details, local authorities in McDowell County entered a remote property, revealing one of the most disturbing records of consanguineous union in modern American history. Located in one of the nation's poorest regions, the Blackwood family's home lay nearly 2 hours from any urban center, accessible only by a dirt road that turned impassable during harsh winters. This physical isolation was just the surface of a deeper separation from society. On a cold October morning, Sheriff Robert Tanner and 2 social workers arrived at the compound following complaints about strangely frail children, rarely seen except on occasional supply trips to Welsh. What they discovered defied comprehension. The property held a dilapidated wooden house and 3 small cabins, sheltering 23 individuals, a startling number given the modest structures. The patriarch, 76-year-old Jeremiah Blackwood, gave evasive answers when asked about the residents. Pointing to a young woman beside him, he stated plainly, "This is Clara, my wife." Only through persistent investigation did the truth emerge. Clara was actually his granddaughter, born from a relationship between his son and daughter. Further inquiry revealed Jeremiah also maintained a relationship with Abigail, his great-granddaughter, born from his union with Clara. The Blackwood family tree had become so entangled that geneticists later had to devise new models to chart the relationships. Among the 23 inhabitants, 17 displayed obvious physical deformities, severe strabismus, disproportionate limbs, and profoundly limited cognitive abilities. Experts would later confirm these were direct results of generations of inbreeding. Social workers noted that children aged 10 to 15 could barely form complete sentences. Many had curved spines and crooked fingers, classic signs of recessive genetic disorders. The most disturbing aspect, recalled social worker Martha Collins, was not just the physical conditions, but the entire system of isolation Jeremiah imposed. The children had never attended school, never seen a doctor, and believed their way of life was the only one possible. The family's origins traced back to the early 1900s, when Jeremiah's father, William, settled there after fleeing Kentucky amid rumors of an incestuous relationship. The isolation was intentional, a shield against social and legal judgment. When Jeremiah inherited the property in 1932, he deepened the seclusion. Children were forbidden from speaking to outsiders, and any contact with the world beyond was strictly controlled. He propagated a belief that the outside world was dangerous and that only by remaining pure could the family survive. Jeremiah's diaries revealed a twisted vision. He believed he was cultivating a superior lineage through inbreeding, a grotesque distortion of early 20th century eugenic theories. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. These dark stories uncover the hidden facets of American society that history books often overlook. Each case brings to light truths many would prefer to keep buried. The Blackwood family was not merely an isolated aberration but a chilling reflection of practices that persisted in various isolated Appalachian communities throughout the 1900s. Geographic isolation, extreme poverty, and lack of education created conditions where consanguinity could continue long after being condemned by wider society. Even more shocking was that some locals knew of the situation but chose silence under the guise of respecting privacy, a complicit quiet that allowed generations of suffering. When authorities finally intervened, a complex operation began to assess each family member, untangle their relationships, and plan steps to break the cycle of abuse while preserving their dignity. In the next chapter, we'll see how the medical community reacted to the extent of the genetic damage, the challenges of integrating the family into society, and the first testimonies from those who lived inside the Blackwood compound. When a medical team from the University of West Virginia arrived in McDowell County, Dr. Harold Richardson, a geneticist leading the group, was unprepared for what he found. With over 2 decades of experience, he described it as one of the most extreme cases of inbreeding depression ever documented in American medical literature. Initial exams showed 17 family members had severe genetic conditions. 8 children had polydactyly, extra fingers or toes. 11 had microcephaly, characterized by abnormally small skulls and brains. Nearly all had intellectual disabilities, with IQs between 40 and 70, far below the average of 100. What we see here is not the result of a single inappropriate relationship, but generations of consecutive consanguineous unions, Dr. Richardson explained. In the Blackwood family, we observe the cumulative effect of at least 4 generations of inbreeding. Among the most severe cases was 9-year-old Timothy, son of Clara and Jeremiah, who suffered from a rare combination of congenital heart disease, intestinal atresia, and neural tube defects. Even with intervention, doctors estimated he would not live past 20. Preliminary genetic analysis indicated extreme homozygosity, identical genes inherited from both parents, clear evidence of close inbreeding. Mental health assessments revealed further tragedy. Many family members showed signs of severe psychiatric disorders. Studies would later confirm that prolonged inbreeding increases risks for schizophrenia and mood disorders. Mary Blackwood, 43, Jeremiah's eldest daughter, experienced recurring catatonia and auditory hallucinations. She had spent her life on the property, isolated in a cabin during her worst episodes, never receiving medical care. The Blackwood case provides invaluable insights into the effects of prolonged inbreeding on human populations, noted Dr. Elizabeth Harlow, a geneticist who joined the research. At a time when molecular genetics was in its infancy, this family offered an unprecedented case study. The scientific implications were substantial. Research on the Blackwoods contributed significantly to understanding genetic inheritance and the consequences of inbreeding. It's as if we observed a genetic experiment conducted over decades, remarked Dr. Richardson. An experiment no ethics committee would ever approve, yet one that yielded data otherwise unattainable. The case also posed ethical dilemmas: how to balance scientific value with respect for the subject's dignity, and how to intervene without insensitively imposing external values. An ethics committee was formed, creating protocols that would later guide similar cases nationwide. For the children born of Jeremiah's unions with Clara and Abigail, prospects were particularly bleak. They faced not only physical and cognitive challenges, but also profound social and educational deprivation. These children are victims of both genetic conditions and imposed social isolation, said social worker Patricia Dawson. They grew up believing their situation was normal and the outside world hostile. Integration posed enormous challenges. Younger members needed intensive medical care, socialization, and education. Older individuals, deeply indoctrinated, often resisted and wished to return to isolation. The local community reacted with horror, compassion, and sometimes rejection. How do we explain this to our children? One resident asked anonymously. How do we welcome them knowing what happened? Such reactions highlighted the difficulty of balancing victim protection with perpetrator accountability, especially when cognitive limitations blurred the lines between the two. In the next chapter, we'll examine the legal proceedings against Jeremiah Blackwood and the challenges faced by the social welfare system in seeking solutions for the family. After months of therapy, family members began to share their experiences. Clara, then 32, was the first to speak in a session with psychologist Dr. Margaret Wilson. Her account, recorded and transcribed, provides a disturbing window into life on the property. "I never knew another life," Clara began softly. "Grandpa always said we were special, that the outside world would destroy us because they couldn't understand our purity. When I was 13, he said it was our duty to preserve the family lineage, that it was God's will." Clara had been raised entirely within this distorted microcosm. Her mother, Sarah, was Jeremiah's daughter with his own daughter Elizabeth, making Clara simultaneously his granddaughter and great-granddaughter. He controlled everything: when we ate, slept, spoke. No one questioned Grandpa. When Abigail was born, he said she would be his next wife, that it was how we kept our family strong. I felt something was wrong, but I had no words for it. I didn't know there was another way. Older children like Thomas, 14, and Rebecca, 12, described lives of constant labor without education, healthcare, or entertainment beyond Jeremiah's stories about the evils of the outside world. Grandpa said people in town would kill us if they knew who we were, Thomas recalled. Only he could protect us. When I asked why my fingers looked different, he said it was a sign of our superiority, that we were the chosen ones. Psychological manipulation was reinforced by physical isolation. The property was surrounded by dense forest, children were taught to fear strangers. Rare supply trips to town were tightly controlled, with family members instructed not to speak and to keep their heads down. He said doctors were the worst, Clara explained. That they would cut open our heads to study our special brains. So no one ever saw a doctor, even when terribly sick. Many of us died that way. My little brother Michael died of fever when I was 10. Grandpa said he was too weak for our lineage. Educational deprivation was another control mechanism. Jeremiah only allowed basic reading and arithmetic, taught by himself or older family members. Any unapproved books were forbidden. He had some old books, especially a Bible he interpreted his own way, said Mary, one of Jeremiah's daughters. He said God told Abraham to preserve his lineage, and we were doing the same. That evil people had twisted God's words to stop families like ours. Jeremiah had created his own religion, blending fundamentalist Christianity with distorted eugenic ideas. When Abigail, then 16, finally spoke, her words were especially poignant. As the product of Jeremiah and Clara's union, she suffered from severe scoliosis and moderate intellectual disability. I always knew I was different, she struggled to say. Other children could run. I couldn't. Grandpa said I was his most precious jewel. I didn't want it, but I was afraid. We all were. If this story moves you, leave a comment saying, no one deserves to grow up in the silence of abuse. Your voice helps ensure such stories are not forgotten. The Blackwood case raises profound questions about how society treats isolated communities and how collective silence enables systematic abuse across generations. What haunts me isn't how Jeremiah did what he did, but how we allowed it for so long, social worker Martha Collins later reflected. There were signs, rumors, opportunities to intervene. We chose not to see, not to hear, not to speak. And in that silence, generations suffered. Therapeutic intervention was complex and unprecedented. For younger children, transition was difficult but promising. For adults, reprogramming a lifetime of conditioning proved far more challenging. We're asking them not only to process trauma, but to rebuild their understanding of family, normalcy, and appropriateness, explained Dr. Wilson. This will take years, perhaps decades. In the next chapter, we'll explore Jeremiah Blackwood's trial and the difficult question of how justice applies when the perpetrator created a system so isolated that traditional notions of guilt are blurred. Jeremiah Blackwood's trial began in March 1968 in McDowell County Court, becoming one of West Virginia's most complex and sensational legal proceedings. He faced multiple counts: incest with minors, deprivation of medical care, forced isolation, and neglect resulting in death. Prosecutor William Hayes confronted an unprecedented challenge: how to try a man who had created his own micro-society where wider social norms did not exist. The defense, led by public defender Thomas Green, argued Jeremiah lacked the mental capacity to understand the criminality of his actions. Psychological tests placed his IQ around 65, indicating mild to moderate intellectual disability. My client lived his entire life within a value system passed down by his father, Green stated. He cannot distinguish between what his isolated community deemed acceptable and what broader society defines as criminal. Judging him is like judging someone from an entirely alien culture. This argument sparked intense debate. The Charleston Gazette condemned it as dangerous moral relativism, insisting some actions are fundamentally wrong across all cultures. Expert testimony became central. Anthropologists, psychologists, geneticists, and social workers helped the jury grasp the case's complexity. Dr. Richardson explained how generations of inbreeding affected not only physical health but also cognitive and moral development. The accused is both perpetrator and victim, testified Dr. Wilson. His actions caused undeniable harm, yet he was socialized into a system that normalized them, and his ability to make independent moral judgments was likely compromised. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Clara testified. Speaking softly, often through tears, she said, "I didn't know there was another way to live. But I always felt something was wrong, the constant fear, the shame when people stared in town. Part of me believed we were special, like he said. Another part knew we were trapped. Asked if she blamed Jeremiah, she hesitated. He did what his father did. He knew no other way. But that doesn't mean it should have continued. Someone had to stop the cycle. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Jeremiah guilty on most counts, with mitigating circumstances due to his limited mental capacity. Judge Clarence Morris acknowledged the difficulty of sentencing. No punishment can repair the damage done, he said. Yet the severity of these acts demands a judicial response. Jeremiah received a 20-year sentence to be served in a state medical institution, a largely symbolic ruling given his age and frail health. The trial set important legal precedents regarding mental capacity, cultural isolation, and criminal responsibility. It also sparked national attention on isolated Appalachian communities, leading to revised social service guidelines for early identification and intervention. For the Blackwood family, the verdict marked a new beginning. With Jeremiah removed, focus shifted to rehabilitation and integration. The property was sold, with proceeds placed in a trust for the family's ongoing care. In the next and final chapter, we'll follow the fates of Blackwood family members over the subsequent decades, the scientific advances stemming from their case, and the broader lessons American society learned from this tragedy. Nearly 6 decades later, the lives of Blackwood family members have taken dramatically different paths. Jeremiah died in 1972 of heart complications, still believing he had been unjustly punished for preserving his lineage. His case contributed to forensic psychiatry's understanding of how isolation and inbreeding affect moral development. Clara showed remarkable resilience. After intensive care, she gradually developed social and educational skills. By 1975, with social services help, she moved to a supervised community and worked in a sheltered workshop. Her case shows both the limits and possibilities of recovery, noted Dr. Wilson, who followed her progress for over 20 years. She built a life with dignity and even joy, something once thought impossible. Clara passed away in 2010 at 75, remembered for her love of gardening and kindness. Abigail and the younger children, discovered at earlier ages, had more opportunities for intervention. Abigail underwent multiple surgeries for her scoliosis and eventually worked as an aide in a care facility. In a 1989 letter to Drive Wilson, she wrote, "I still have nightmares about the old house. But I wake up and see people living normal lives, and I know I've found my place. I have a life that is mine, more than I ever dreamed." Long-term studies of the family provided valuable insights for genetics, psychology, and social work. Advanced genetic analyses in the 1990s identified specific recessive mutations that had accumulated over generations. The Blackwood case remains one of the clearest examples of extreme homozygosity in human populations, wrote Dr. Lawrence Peterson of Johns Hopkins in a Science article. It helps us understand genetic mechanisms and develop better interventions for rare conditions. The case also significantly impacted child protection policies. In 1974, partly in response to cases like the Blackwoods, Congress passed the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, establishing national standards for identifying and addressing neglect and abuse. Extreme isolation came to be recognized as a potential form of neglect, noted former Sheriff Tanner, who later advocated for child protection reforms. Family privacy cannot shield severe harm. Educational programs on the risks of consanguinity were implemented in rural schools, particularly in isolated regions like Appalachia. While early media coverage was often sensational, later works, like journalist Elizabeth Harper's 1987 book The Silent Mountains, contextualized the case within broader patterns of economic abandonment and social neglect in Appalachia. Some family members adapted remarkably. Thomas, who was 14 at discovery, eventually completed a carpentry course and opened a furniture restoration workshop. Others, like Mary with severe psychiatric conditions, required lifelong institutional care. In 2017, the University of West Virginia held a symposium titled Lessons from Appalachia, Isolation, Intervention, and Ethics. The Blackwood case forces us to confront fundamental questions about autonomy, community responsibility, and the limits of state intervention, said medical ethicist Dr. Rebecca Johnson. It reminds us of our duty to protect the most vulnerable, especially when hidden by geography. Today, few physical traces remain of the Blackwood property. In 2005, a small memorial was placed in McDowell County honoring those who suffered in silence and those who brought light to dark places. The story of West Virginia's most inbred family remains a powerful testament to human fragility and resilience, the devastating consequences of extreme isolation, and our shared responsibility to protect the vulnerable. If you've watched this far, you appreciate these deep historical investigations. Leave a comment saying, "Watched here," so I can know who truly values these stories. Please like and share this video with friends interested in real accounts that reveal hidden chapters of American history. Subscribe to stay updated on our future explorations of isolated communities and their lasting impacts. Together, we can bring these necessary stories to light so they are never repeat.